Could it really be true? Could a lion remember a single face after 20 years out of all the people it must have seen over its life? Could it still recognize one? The one who once held it close when it was just a small, terrified cub, lost and alone in the middle of a forest fire? Most would say no. It sounds like something out of a movie, but on the sweeping plains of the Serengeti, something happened that defied every ounce of logic, something that proved love, real love, never forgets. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the grasslands in soft orange light, a large male lion emerged from the horizon. No roar, no hunting posture, just quiet, steady steps through the tall grass, and then, like he was following a memory, he walked right up to a woman, lowered his massive head, and gently rested it on her shoulder. No one moved. No one spoke. The woman. She was the same person who once saved him, when he was too small to even stand. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a silent miracle. The kind you wouldn't believe if someone told you. You had to see it with your own eyes. And for anyone who's ever loved an animal like family, this story will feel like coming home. It all began back in 2005. It was the height of East Africa's dry season. The sun was brutal, and the wind carried nothing but dust across the parched earth of the Mikumi Wildlife Reserve. That's where a young volunteer named Elena had just arrived. She was only 22 then, fresh out of university, full of passion, eager to make a difference. She'd joined a small wildlife rescue team working deep inside the reserve. Elena spent her days tending to orphaned animals, documenting behaviors and learning everything she could from local conservationists. It was hard work, dusty, unpredictable, but she loved it. One morning, she was out surveying the remains of a recent forest fire near the park's edge. Most of the area was silent. Burned trees, ash, nothing alive. But then, something. A soft sound, barely noticeable, a faint rustle in the brush. She paused. Crouching low, she carefully pushed aside some scorched shrubs, and there he was, a lion cub. Curled up tight, shaking, barely moving. His fur was singed, one tiny paw was burned. His wide, watery eyes locked with hers, and they didn't look away. He didn't growl, didn't try to run. He was too weak. Elena slowly scooped him up, wrapping him in her shirt like he was made of glass, and whispered, "It's okay now. I've got you." On the way back to camp, she gave him a name, Riku. From that moment on, they were inseparable. At the rescue station, Elena took care of Riku like he was her own child. She cleaned his wounds, fed him warm milk from a bottle, and tucked him into a blanket every night. Day by day, he began to recover. He grew stronger, bolder, and before long, Riku wasn't just a rescue anymore. He was family. He followed Elena. Everywhere, clumsily tripping over his big paws, curling up beside her when she rested, rubbing his head against her knees like a house cat craving affection. The team had built a special enclosure for recovering predators, and within weeks, Riku had full run of the space. But even with all that freedom, he never strayed far from her. One afternoon, Elena had to leave the camp for a few hours to pick up supplies. When she got back, she found Riku sitting at the gate. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't played. He had just waited, eyes locked on the trail, like he knew she'd come back, and the moment she stepped out of the Jeep, he ran to her, letting out soft, almost human-like sounds of relief. That bond they had, you couldn't put it into words. It was something deeper than language. For a while, they lived in that joy. But the wild has a way of reminding you, nothing stays the same. As Riku grew older, stronger, more like the lion he was born to be, the rescue center had to make a hard decision. It was time for him to return to the wild. That was always the goal. Rescue, rehabilitate, release. It's for his own good, they told her gently. Elena nodded. She knew they were right. But inside, her heart shattered. On the day of his release, she walked him to the training gate herself. She knelt beside him, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Be strong out there, but if one day you miss me, you can come back." Riku just looked at her, long and deep. Then, without a sound, he turned and disappeared into the tall grass, into the wild, into the unknown. Years passed. 10, 15, 20. Alina was no longer the dusty, bright-eyed volunteer. She lived quietly now, in a small coastal town far from the wilds of Tanzania. She spent her mornings on the porch, sipping tea, watching the ocean. On her lap, always, was the same old photo, a young woman lying under a tree with a lion cub, snuggled close. That was Riku, her boy, her miracle. She never stopped thinking about him. Her son, Noah, was a nature filmmaker, traveling across the globe to capture stories of wildlife. One summer, he invited her to join him on a documentary. Shoot, they were headed back to Tanzania, to Mikumi, of all places. At first, Alina laughed it off. "I'm too old for adventures now," she said, smiling. But Noah nudged her. "Just a short trip. Maybe it'll bring back good memories." There was something in his voice, something gentle and knowing. She paused. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to go back, to visit the place where a piece of her heart still lived. They arrived a week later, driving across the same dusty roads she'd once walked. The land still held that same golden stillness. But the reserve had changed. New signs, updated facilities, more staff, better equipment. Conservation had come a long way, but Alina's heart? It was stuck in the past. That's when it happened. Just as they were setting up to film, a guide called out softly. A lone male lion had been spotted nearby, close, but calm. Curious, even. He wasn't acting like a predator. The crew kept their distance, but Elena, she stepped forward, her breath caught. The lion stood still, head tilted slightly. Then, slowly, steadily, he walked toward her. Not aggressive, not wary, just sure. And then he pressed his massive head gently against her shoulder. There were no words, no dramatic music, just tears. Tears from a woman who had once whispered to a broken cub, "You can come back." And now, 20 years later, he had, watching, waiting, hoping for one more moment to say, "I remember you." Alina didn't return to the reserve after that final visit, not because she didn't want to, but because she felt something inside her had come, full circle. What more was there to ask for? She had seen with her own eyes what she had only dreamed about for 2 decades. And sometimes, one moment is enough for a lifetime. Back home by the coast, she resumed her quiet life. The porch, the sea breeze, the steaming cup of tea in the morning. But now, next to the photo of her and young Riku under that tree, there was a new one. A lion with a silvered mane resting gently against her shoulder. 2 lifetimes between the images, and yet the same eyes. Noah turned that encounter into a short documentary titled, "He Never Forgot." It wasn't flashy. It didn't have dramatic music or overly scripted narration. It was simple, honest. A story about a lion, a woman, and the bond they never let go of. The film went viral, not because of shock value, but because it struck something deep in people. Thousands of comments poured in, stories of pets that had found their way home after years, of dogs remembering soldiers after long deployments, of horses recognizing former riders after decades, of cats showing up on doorsteps miles away from their old homes. Elena read those stories. She smiled at them. Some made her laugh. Some made her cry, but all of them reminded her she and Riku were not alone. Months passed. Seasons changed. Life, as it always does, moved forward. But once in a while, Elena would look out the window and imagine the open plains again, the rustle of tall grass, the golden skies, and somewhere out there, an old lion still roaming. Maybe lying under a tree, maybe watching the wind, maybe remembering the arms that once held him safe. And in that quiet moment, Elena would close her eyes and whisper, "I remember you too."